I spent the last week running benchmarks on every major Azure VM generation, Intel and AMD. And what I found completely changed the way how I think about picking session hosts for virtual desktop. Here's the thing. Most people just pick a VM SKU, they spin up their host pool, and then they move on. They never actually test whether they've picked the right chip or not. And it turns out that decision is costing some organizations a serious amount of money and performance issues. And in some cases, it's making user experience worse. So look at this. Same VM size, same vCPUs, same RAM, Intel versus AMD, side by side across every generation from V4 all the way up to V7. And the AMD CPU scores at V7, 5070, Intel's best, 4045. That's a 25% gap in performance on the same VM. But then look at the disk. Both of them, Intel and AMD, completely fall off a cliff at V7. And that's when I figured out why. I realized that there's a hidden gotcha in these VM SKUs that no one's talking about. One that could be silently wrecking your page file, mess up your FSLogix, and tank your users' login times. You would never know it just from looking at Azure Portal. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The team at GoEEC, one of the most respected independent benchmarking communities in the EC space, they ran their own Intel versus AMD testing using real-world user experience workloads, not just synthetic scores, and the results they actually flip what I saw slightly. And I'm going to show you what they found and what I found and why it matters for how you size your next host pools. My name's Neil McLaughlin, I am the Virtual Monk, and I've been deep in EUC computing space for about 20 years. I test all this stuff out so you don't have to. And this video, I'm going to show you the full benchmark results across every generation, every metric, Intel versus AMD. I'm going to show you exactly what SKUs you'll be deploying for AVD right now, which ones to avoid, and there is one specific combination that I think is a sweet spot that barely anyone is using. So if you're running AVD or planning a deployment, if you want to watch this one to the end, you'll enjoy it. So let's get into it. All right, so as you know from the video that I did last week, I tested every VM SKU generation from V3, V4, V5, V6, and V7. And the performance increases were quite large, right? I got quite a few questions from the community. What about Intel versus AMD? So what I've actually gone and done, I've actually gone and done and redone all those tests using AMD and Intel as well, just to see what those performance differences are like. And the results are very interesting. It certainly changed my mindset because me personally, it's never really something that I've looked into, but I've heard a lot of people over the years saying, hey, you should be using this one certain sort of provider. That's what we're going to go in today's video. I'll do a quick recap about last week's results, and then we're going to get into do and look at the actual results that we've got for AMD versus Intel. I'm actually going to do a separate video about that. That'll probably be next week's video, because what I noticed was when we were doing the testing, as soon as it went from V6 to V7 VMs, the disk performance tanked on the Intel processors. I redid the same test on AMD and exactly the same thing happened. So I've done some digging and I found out exactly why that is, but I'm going to wait until next week to tell you about that. But yeah, let's get into the results and let's see what the actual differences are between AMD and Intel. And if you're new to the channel, then welcome. This is the Virtual Monk YouTube channel. And on this channel, we review the latest news about Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365, Nerdio, Intune, Azure, VDI, DAS, all that kind of stuff. So if that's the type of stuff that you're into, definitely help and click the subscribe. And if you like these videos, please also comment, because that also helps me grow the channel. So now we're going to get deep into results. So we're going to have a look and see what the actual results testing were. If you wanted to look at how I did this testing, then please check last week's video. I'm not going to go through it again, but essentially what we're looking for is see how they compare against memory, CPU, and disk, right? Because obviously the faster the CPU, the better user experience that the user is going to have. And the same accounts for the disk memory as well. All right, let's go and check the results. Now, big caveat is we couldn't check the V3 VMs because AMD actually retired to the V3 SKUs, so I couldn't test any of those. But let me walk through the results now for you. Now, interesting thing straight away is in every single score category, the AMDs were faster. Okay, they weren't slower, they were faster. So I found that very interesting. Other people have mentioned this to me before, but I'm going to discuss some things soon that GoEEC have been testing, because just because it's faster doesn't always relate to better user experience. So we'll go into that shortly. Right, first of all, we'll look at the overall score, right? So this is a combined sort of average score of everything. In the blue corner, we have the Intel. In the red corner, we have the AMD, right? So you can see here on the V4 VM, the overall score for the AMD was 40% faster, and we're looking at it in a bit more detail shortly. And then again, For the V5, it was 12% faster, and the V6, 9%, and then the V7, 6%. So it seems to be that gap is getting smaller and smaller, but in every single scenario that I tested, the AMD was faster, okay, which is very interesting, especially when you consider the cost, which we'll go into next. So that was the overall score. So next in memory, so you've got V4, 17% faster, V5, 2% faster, V6, 62% faster. So not quite sure what they did there, but that's a huge increase. And then V7, 15% faster as well, memory. And then again, we can look at the CPU. So the CPU score, V4, 44% faster, V5 19% faster, V6 11%, and then V7 25% faster CPU, which is crazy, right? So if you think about how that can affect user sort of end user performance, that could be quite considerable. And then you've got to think about all the latest AI stuff as well. That is really interesting that there's so much ahead compared to sort of Intel. So next let's look at the disks. So disk score from V4, 41% faster, V5 exactly the same, quite interesting. The V6 2%, so again the same, and then V7 1% the same. So not much difference in the disk there, which kind of explains it, right? Because as I mentioned in the last week's video, the disk subsystem is shared, so it doesn't really make much difference. Now, the one thing which I did notice compared to last week's testing is you can see here the actual disk performance also tanked when we went from V6 to V7. I found out the reason why. I'm not going to say it in today's video. I'll use it as next week's video just to do some comparisons. But yeah, there's a specific reason why this happens. Okay, so slight hint, I'm using the VM SKU, which doesn't have a local disk, right? So it's just running purely on a managed disk. Okay, so that's a slight hint as to what the issue here. But yeah, I just found this very interesting that in every single scenario that I tested, the AMD VMs came out faster than the actual Intel CPUs. Okay, so are they more expensive? Are they cheaper? Or are they the same costs? Let's have a look. Performance is better, so surely you expect that it'd be more expensive, right? Let's take a look at the costs. So what I've done here is I've compared the costs from the Azure Cost Center of AMD SKU versus Intel SKU, running at 220 hours a month, okay, for a single session VM. So let's see what the data is telling us. So for a V4, exactly the same, but you're getting better performance, right? So as you saw, the V4, you got 40% better performance. For a V5, the AMD actually works out a bit more expensive, but you're getting 10% more performance, right? So it's 21p more expensive, so not a huge difference. V6 VMs, which is where it gets interesting. So a AMD V6 VM is actually cheaper, right? So it's £1.97p cheaper per VM per day. Doesn't sound much, but it adds up, right? Especially if you're running thousands of virtual machines, okay? But 15% better performance, right, from the CPU perspective. So why would you not do that? Because it's faster and it's cheaper, right? So I found that really interesting. Now, for the V7 VM, I couldn't do any direct comparisons, obviously, because the pricing for the V7 Intel VMs hasn't been released yet. So I didn't do a direct comparison there. But for the V7 VM, it's exactly the same price around that. But I'm a bit dubious about the V7 VMs at the moment because of the disk issues, which I'll go into next week's video. But the V7 VM isn't necessarily the best one to go for here. But for now, I'll probably stick to the V6 VMs. But you seem to get a good bang for your buck for those, especially if you're running Intel. So for me, if you are very cost conscious, if you are very performance conscious, then I think you need to take a serious look at the AMD CPUs because they do genuinely seem to offer a lot more value. Most people just generally stick to the Intel CPUs because they know that they've been around for a long time. But this testing has opened my eyes as to maybe we should start looking at AMD CPUs a lot deeper and a lot more environments because they do seem to be quicker and they do seem to be cheaper. So obviously AMD is trying to compete with Intel, so maybe that's why they reduced the price a bit to make it cheaper. And obviously they put a lot of time and effort into the performance of those VMs as well. And that's definitely showing in the data that we've got here as well. Just to back this up, a couple of friends of mine at GoEUC, and they did their own testing. So what did that show? Let's have a look. Okay, so on the screen, you can see the GoEUC testing, and I want you to read this bit. So In a direct comparison between each generation, the Intel-based SKUs outperform AMD SKUs with 1.7 higher UX score, which is user experience score, in the V6 generation and 1.3% higher scores in the V5 generation. Okay, so what's interesting in this scenario is actually the memory and the CPU disk still say they're faster, but from an actual user experience perspective, there's 1% difference. Okay, which to be honest, you probably wouldn't really notice. The conclusion that they came to as part of their testing, I'll put a link to this so you can read the full article, was pretty much the same conclusion that I've come to. So based on the results, AMD SKUs offer better balance of performance and costs, right? With the VSKU difference has a minimal difference. In terms of cost, the difference is 11% in favor of AMD. So yeah, that's generally the same kind of results that we came to as part of our testing as well. Definitely seems to be in favor of the AMD. Yeah, hats off to AMD. They've done a great job here. Now, a lot of people still may prefer to run Intel workloads because I've had seen a few things on the forum that some people have issues with AMD. Maybe VM's not booting up or some weird random stuff going on. So Intel may be still the preferred workload in your environment. But from what I've done from my testing or from what GoUC have done, I think AMD seem to have the upper hand here because they seem to be a bit quicker, especially when you talk about all the AI stuff as well. As pure compute power, right? They're definitely up there, but they're cheaper, right? The cost seems to be cheaper as well. Yeah, that's it from this week's video. As I hope you found this useful, by the way. I know I love doing testing like this. It's really opens your eyes, all right, as to what's out there. But one thing, as I mentioned, is we saw a big disk issue on the V7 VMs where the disk performance just seemed to nosedive when you went from V6 to V7. There is a reason for that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll look at that in next week's video. But yeah, my recommendation is if you're very cost conscious, if you're very performance conscious, then take a serious look at the AMD workloads, because as we see here, even with just running 1,000 virtual machines, it could save you up to £21,480. So imagine if you've got more than that, right? Double, that's 40 grand a year. That's an employee, right? So definitely something you want to take seriously because you could get some serious, considerable cost savings from that as well. All right, that's it from this week. I will see you next week for another video. Bye bye.